Welcome to everybody who's joining our webinar today on processing facilities. I'd like to just introduce a couple of people who will be speaking. First of all, will be myself. I'm Steve Becker. I'm with CCS, Central Confinement Services. We're a general contractor in Columbus, Nebraska. And I've got a background in buildings, and good to be here and be your host. Second of all, I'd like to introduce Dr. Keith DeHaan. He's the managing principal of Food and Livestock Planning out of Kansas City, Kansas. He specializes in technical service and management services to start up and start over meat companies and plants. He also does feasibility research and business planning for new or changing food companies. He's food-related market research for companies and agencies and new technologies that may be coming into the industry. Keith states that he develops integrated food systems with innovation and hard work. Keith, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Good to have you here. And one more invitation and one more introduction. David Skaggs is joining us this morning. He's comes from the Michigan area and a graduate of Michigan State University. He's been a ranch manager in South Dakota, spent 14 years with North Star Select Sires. He spent also 14 years recently with the South Dakota Department of Ag and the ag development of dairy, swine, and livestock. Actually, we're really happy to now have Dave on our team at CCS and assisting us with dairy, swine, and other projects. Dave, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Steve, for the invite, and it's a pleasure to be working with you guys. It's exciting.
Well, I know we want to get into this webinar. I've got just a couple of things I want to talk about with CCS. We are a general contractor, like I said, and we do a lot of business in the swine, beef housing facilities, dairy facilities, and then other construction too, such as commercial construction, business structures, equipment storages, shops, all those types of things we're very comfortable going after and working on with you. Part of what we do is work hard up front in the budgeting area. We spend a lot of time on putting facilities designs together to meet your needs. Then we can also help with the permitting and the consultation and all those things you need to do sometimes to get that site and building ready to go. And then we'll move right into the construction management. We can take that project all the way from the very beginning to the end, or we can work with you on a project by scheduling and working through all of the aspects of that construction process for you. We do, when we're done with that, then we've got warranty services available and also maintenance. We've been around for 35 years and after a while, some of those projects need a little bit of maintenance and we're happy to do that. And we intend to be around a lot more years to help with that. So if you got questions or like to speak with us at CCS, there's a nice page on our webinar, on our website that you can contact us, and we'd appreciate hearing from you. So let's get started with the webinar, get right to the meat here. And my first question would be, Keith, so you're looking at building a facility. Where do we start?
Well, I always start with two basic questions, and if the clients can answer those questions, I think it's got a good possible future and can be sustainable. If they can't, it usually doesn't go very far. And it's the two M's. The first one is money. Is the project investor worthy or credit worthy? And can you raise the funds? Are you able to raise the funds? And if their question always leads is, well, how much is it going to cost? You know, you can come up with this kind of a typical scenario. Let's say it's $2 million. If it's around $2 million, can you raise at least half of that? And they got to be able to answer that question. The second one is the market. You know, we know where the cattle come from, or the hogs come from, or the lambs come from, but what's your plan on selling the meat? So again, money and the market are the two questions. I don't get too far beyond that, because if they can answer those two questions, then the rest of it can take care of itself. But they've got to be able to answer those first two questions.
Good, thanks, Keith. So let's say you've decided you've gotten those questions in a positive response, then you first want to take a look at a site. Is that the next step when you've answered those questions in a positive?
Well, the site is early in the game, and we can, you got the slide there. Let's talk about it. Regarding the site, there's several criteria that you have got to consider, and there is a scoring mechanism we've worked on over the years, but importantly, that you got to look at, is the area you're looking, or the candidates that you're looking at, meet with community acceptance? And there's ways that. There's ways you could gauge that, but that's got to be the first. Is the area you're looking at going to be confrontational, or do you think it will certainly be acceptable to the community around you? Is it zoned appropriately? Most of the zoning requirements are for light industrial. It kind of depends on your local community, your county, but it needs to be zoned appropriately. If you're taking farm ground out and you need to convert that, there is a process you go through to get the zoning change for that, but it has to be accomplished. The size is important as well, and that you need to have a somewhat of an idea about how big of projects you have so you could size accordingly. And then it needs to be buffered to residences and other businesses. You'd like to have suitable buffer. A lot of industrial sites are not adequately buffered. Some are, but you've certainly got to keep that in mind. Do you have access to municipal services? Or is it large? Is your site large enough to accommodate a lagoon? So wastewater is very important. If you're going into an industrial park, can you access the city's wastewater treatment facility, and do they have enough capacity to treat your pollution strength? And I and some other engineers can assist with that process. Or if you are in agricultural land and need to convert that to light industrial, you have enough space to build a suitable lagoon. And again, that same engineer will help you decide how to size the lagoon. Then also, if you are, some small plants compost, you've got to have enough land to be able to compost, and you have to have enough drainage so that you don't have the leachate go into the groundwater. So you got to give that some consideration as well. Then, of course, under that same topic, you got to be able to access electrical or power, and if that includes electrical and perhaps natural gas. And if you don't have natural gas available to that site, what does it cost to get it in there? And you got to compare that to the cost of propane. So those are some considerations. The distance to a rendering company is important as well, because somehow you got to manage your waste. And if you don't have the ability to compost, you certainly got to have somebody be able to pick up that waste. Distance makes a lot of difference, because it will sometimes is the indicator whether you get a debit or a credit. Most cases today, it comes in the form of a debit. But nevertheless, if you're not too far away, it's possible. You don't have a lot of freight involved. It's possible to get a credit, and volume depends on how much volume you generate. You'd certainly like to get a credit. It's kind of difficult paying for waste leaving your property to a rendering company. You got to look at egress, regress, and that would be structures of roads coming in, leaving. You have an idea. You got traffic coming in. You got traffic going out. Is that site adaptable to that? It costs money to build roads, so you got to give all those due consideration. There's others as well, but those are the most important from my standpoint.
Well, Keith, that is quite a list. I would like to reach out to those attending the webinar and remind you, if you have some questions as we go through this, feel free to log those into the chat room, and we'll address them either as we go, or we'll pick up on them for the end of the presentation. So, Keith, so all of those things need to come together, and I think there's a feasibility study and a business plan. Is that what puts those things together?
Yeah, the feasibility study is typically a precursor, and it generates information that you would use in the business plan. The feasibility study is like a 10,000-foot view of your project. The business plan is eye level. And the feasibility study is where you generate the sensitivity analysis. A lot of your financial models are sensitivity analysis. For example, you want to know if you want to manufacture jerky. Well, you use that as a sensitivity analysis to determine whether you're going to be manufacturing jerky or not in the business plan. Same thing with the size, 50 versus 100 head of beef cattle, for example. You look at all of those scenarios in your feasibility analysis. There are some common aspects between feasibility and business planning. For example, the market. The market's critical, and I'll keep bringing that up a lot. But in the feasibility analysis, the market is not a market plan, it's a market analysis. You're looking at all the availability of market that you can approach. Then you're looking at the feedback from that. What is the most reasonable market to pursue? Once you've made those decisions, or it comes out of the feasibility analysis, that's plugged into the business plan. So again, a lot of the aspects of the feasibility study are the same aspects as in the business plan, but they're looked at differently. The supply side, on the feasibility analysis, it's a supply analysis to look at the kinds of animals you have in your region. Whereas you make that selection from the feasibility study and you plug that in as an actual plan in the business plan. The business plan is a little bit different from the standpoint, a lot of the aspects are the same, except for the business plan goes into much detail on legal structure, governance, and management. That typically is not covered much in the feasibility study, but it is covered in great detail in the business plan. So the business plan's financial models are really designed for two things: potential investors and bankers. So actually the financial models in the business plan are really more they're really more financial statements. And in the feasibility study, they're more sensitivity analysis. So the information that comes out of the feasibility study, first of all, you have to know if it's the business is potentially sustainable. And if it is, what are the aspects that make it sustainable? You plug those into the business plan. Now, anything that has government support, if it's USDA support on your project, if it is some kind of if it's some kind of a government funded project, feasibility studies are a necessary precursor for the business plan, and you really have to do them in those stages. However, I will tell you that if you got a group of investors looking very specifically at fast tracking a project, we've done a lot of hybrids. And those hybrids have components of both in one large manuscript, where they have they have features of the feasibility study, they have features of the business plan, and they have features of an offering memorandum, all nested within the same manuscript. So to be able to do it, and to do that, to accomplish that, there's a lot of decisions that has to be made up front by the investment group. They've got to come to the table with a lot of information for you to be able to do that. And so we have, on occasion, been able to fast track by creating a hybrid kind of a system.
Oh, that sounds great, Keith. So the plans are definitely different from each other. I'm wondering if location has much of an impact, where this site would be in, whether it's in Texas or Washington State. Does that come in? There are a lot of variables there that would affect that.
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. Years ago, we did a business plan and built a plant in Northern California, and it's an experience I won't forget, mainly because of the regulatory requirements of the site development. It was horrible. It was one of the worst experiences of my career. If any of you on this webinar have had experience on building or getting permits in California, you understand what I'm talking about. So there are some certain areas you have to spend a little bit more time preparing, studying, getting permit process. Other states are just, in the Midwest predominantly, are pretty easy, pretty simple. That doesn't mean that there isn't restrictions. There are, but it's a lot more difficult in other states. We've done projects in New York State where it has some difficulties as well. But usually here in the Midwest, it's a lot simpler process.
Great. Well, that's a positive here for the Midwest. So now I'd like to bring on David and talk a little bit about what kind of support or resources may be out there for those looking at a startup. Dave, can you comment on, we put a couple of slides up there with some contacts. Dave, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure can, Steve. I'm going to say this is a privilege to be part of this program, and it's been exciting to watch the first webinar, participate in it, and same thing with this one as well. The opportunity is now to move forward. I reached out to each of the states that surround Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, our Midwest region, and got the contact information on who to contact, who to do, who's going to you work with on the licensing, permitting process of the actual meat inspectors, or how to get federal inspectors into your business. That's what's up here on the slide. Here are those contact information. The thing is when you sit here and you explore it, you need to be getting a hold of your Department of Ag, number one, because they're going to be able to help get you the information on where that supply chain is going to be coming from. They should have that data available to you as you're requesting that information. How many head of cattle are in your area, how many pigs, how many sheep, et cetera, goats, whatnot, within your area that you can be pulling from.
Good, Dave. Thanks. Would you want to expand a little bit? I want to talk about that process of permitting. Why don't you expand on that a little bit, and then we'll bring Keith back to kind of finish that permitting section up.
Well, I had to chuckle when Keith mentioned California and permitting, the nightmare and headaches there. Past experience has been that with some dairies in California that have wanted to expand their dairy barns, it's taken them 6 years and $1 million a year to be able to expand or grow. not very business friendly out there. But I mean, on the permitting process, yeah, as an example for the state of South Dakota, you need to be getting involved with the Department of Environmental and Natural Resources. They are the ones that are going to monitor the air quality, water permits, groundwater discharge permits, etc. Need to bring those folks in right away so that you know what you're going to, before you spend a whole lot of money, you want to know what those rules and regulations are so that you're not throwing bad money, or I mean money at something that's not going to work. I gotta say, it's been a privilege working with our Department of Environmental and Natural Resources. Same thing with some of the folks in Minnesota that I've worked with in the past, in North Dakota. Make sure those folks are aware of what you're doing, what you want to do, and they will work with you to help make sure that you know what that level of permitting is and what needs to be done in what order. So I mean, that's that's where you need to start.
Thanks, Dave. Any thought on timelines? How long does that process? How long could it take?
Boy, that can be a can of worms in some states. If you have, here again, you got to put the facility in the right place. Site selection is of the utmost importance. Community acceptance, that's another one. Another tidbit here from past experiences is you start talking to some of these individuals, it would not hurt to have a confidentiality statement that you get the parties that you're working with to sign so that it doesn't get out and about into the community and spread like wildfire. You need to get it into the right people, get the right people on your team, and move forward without the community having a major blow up by not knowing what the truth is and what direction it's going to go. I'm going to say we've done a couple projects here in the past where it hit the rumor mill way before it ever hit the permitting process, and I mean we had to avert some disasters.
Okay, so do the right steps and do them in the right procedure.
Right, and don't plan on rushing it. It takes time to go through the channels.
Well, thanks. Hey, Keith, you want to follow up on that? Any other thoughts on that permitting process?
No, I think David hit those pretty correctly. It's always advisable to work with somebody that's got some experience and has been through it before, or has local connections and has been it before, than starting at somebody with a novice. They can create more problems than they can help. So make sure you're working with the right personnel.
Well, sounds like good advice, Keith. So let's take the next step and talk a little bit about what's involved in the design process. So I imagine there's lots of things to look at when you start down that road of the actual facilities design.
Yeah, and once you know what products you're going to manufacture and the number and type of animals that you'll process, once you have that pretty much in line, then you lay out the room sizes and the refrigeration requirements. That's for refrigerated space. You do the same thing for non-refrigerated space, and then you engage a plant designer, and that plant designer, either an independent plant designer or one works for an engineering company or works for a building company, and you sit down and you plan it out together, draw it out together, lay it out with AutoCAD or some other design software. And there's always, and make sure after you get that done, you get it in the hands of a few people that know what they're doing, that catch any flaws that you might have had. And the timeline, it never goes as fast as you want it to. These designers there's not a lot of them. Experienced ones, there's not a lot of them. And so you got to kind of fit in how much time they have. They're usually got projects backlogged, and you got to work through all that backlog to get time with a seasoned designer.
Okay, no, that's good. So, the design is one thing, and then you really need to get into the details, maybe call it engineering. And the next step of really defining all the key aspects of the facility itself. Couple of thoughts on that. What would be needed there, Keith?
Well, I always put them into 5, and engineering companies may have more than that, but I put them into the 5. And the 5 are the site plans, and that's placing the plant on this. Once you have a site in mind, you got to have an engineering company place the plant on that site, set it on that site. The wastewater design is, and we've mentioned that, is absolutely critical. And the permitting that goes with that, and make sure you're working with seasoned, experienced individuals, perhaps licensed engineers that are experienced in wastewater design. Thirdly, the layout of the electrical, refrigeration, and plumbing, that's got to be done. Fourthly, the process. You have to lay out the process flow. And then the last thing is the layout of the manning stations. And the layout of the manning stations help you determine how many people it's going to take to run your operation. So those are my 5, and an engineering company may have more than that, but those are always the 5 that I break it down to.
Well, thanks, Keith. So I would also wonder about different types of animals. So does that change that engineering and those requirements quite a bit?
It changes a little bit. The mechanical engineers are important, especially if you're doing, well, for example, if you got doing predominantly hogs, but you're going to be doing sows once in a while, you got to make sure you've got the framework that can accommodate the heavier weights. Same thing on the beef side. If you're typically doing 12 to 1,500 pound steers, but all of a sudden you start doing bulls, well, you've got to make sure that you've got enough structure there to support that weight. That weight's so important. So yeah, it's got to be engineered right from that perspective. That's pretty critical. You don't want your rails to come down when you're running bulls, or make sure that your bulls can get through your restrainer. The restrainer's got to be sized right, and got to be able to accommodate the kind of animals that you're going to be bringing into that plant.
Yeah, we had a question on handling different types of animals: beef, buffalo, elk, deer. So that's something you really got to think through when you're designing that equipment, huh?
Right.
Okay. Well, Keith, let's move on to the next topic. So construction processes. So now we've got the facility designed. Keith, just to back up a second, all of those activities to get to the point where, all right, we've got everything in place, we've got our permits, we're ready to go. Now I want to start construction. Is there an average timeline, or is it 9 months to 12 months, or is there an average amount of time that may take?
No, and I think if you got a good project manager, an experienced one, they can more adequately predict the amount of time that's going to take. If you from the time you work with a client that developed the idea until you're ready for this phase, the construction process, I would say you could get that and get all the permits in place. It's possible to do that within a year. I've heard stories that's taken up to 5 years to get to that level. In California, I probably believe that, but here in the Midwest, if you've got everything organized correctly, I think you can get to this point probably within a year. And then the actual construction process, that depends on the construction company and whoever your point person is. who's ever kind of leading the charge on management of that construction.
Yeah, which we would be very comfortable with, providing that construction and follow through. So on the construction portion of it, it's the old saying, it's plan your work and work your plan, but it's about being very, very good at that and working through the process. Some of the things that we do is make sure that we have great partners, subcontractors. We're comfortable with the people that we're working with. We put together a good team, and then on top of that is the scheduling. And so we work with some pretty sophisticated scheduling where everything is scheduled right down to the day. And all the different activities are included in that schedule, and you can be pretty accurate. There are things that happen like weather, but through the entire process, you have weekly meetings where you look at that schedule. Are we behind? Are we ahead? What needs to be tweaked? And staying on top of that is the construction companies or the general contractors' main goal to work through that entire process. Time frame that can vary a lot depending on the scope of the project, just the sheer size of the project or the location too. But that construction phase we are very comfortable with, and we'd be glad to help anybody through that whole process.
And I'm going to add in there, there's a difference between greenfield and brownfield in that regard. Greenfield does take a lot longer. Brownfield takes a while too, but we've been involved in both greenfield and brownfield, and they both take a lot of planning and experienced people and that are the general contractors.
Okay, good. Thanks, Keith. The next slide, planned systemized approach. I want to comment on that concept a little, Keith.
Well, this could take a lot of different, it could be different for different people, but what we're talking about in this slide is to be able to create templates that you can take to other places. And what I mean by that is this. I've worked in almost all states, and almost all states have similar problems, similar opportunities that we all know. I think everybody in this call would recognize that the demand for custom processing far exceeds the capacity for custom processing. So every state I have worked in does not have enough custom processing capacity. So I think this slide could represent that if we could create a systemized approach to where you develop maybe 1, 2, or 3 templates, and that each template has a specific size. Each template has a specific number of animals that it could process on a daily basis, a typical amount of labor required, that you could actually take that systemized approach and put it in spot A, spot B, spot C, spot D, and everybody that it would have a similar price, it would have a similar approach. So it's almost a kind of a franchised approach, even though that there's going to be some differences, there's going to be a lot of similarities as well. And because of those similarities, you might be able to take that concept and plug it into different locale.
That's something that we're very serious about. Matter of fact, we'll be meeting on that on Thursday to discuss that going forward. We've got some nice questions from those that are listening. But I want to ask you just a couple before we get into that. So, yeah, you've been in a lot of situations, Keith. There's been a lot of people that, that sometimes these things win, they're winners, and sometimes they're not as fortunate, it doesn't work out so well. But, what are those maybe attributes or things you see when these projects are real winners and go forward and they're very successful?
Well, that's a great question, and someday I will probably try to write a book about it, because you're right, there are some commonalities of successful projects, and there's also some commonalities of unsuccessful projects. But some commonalities of successful projects, first of all, you find out that there is a good leader, and that good leader has the respect of those in the community, those and the other potential investors. And when they have that kind of respect, people trust them. And when they trust them, they trust the projects they represent. So that's one. Secondly is the management team. The management team can make or break a project. There are two problems that I've seen. One is they can't find adequate management, and so they find somebody that's affordable and probably needs a job, and those are always going to fail. But then on the opposite side of that spectrum, you find ex-CEO of Excel, for example, available because he's retired and cost $1 bazillion a year, and they think, well, that he's done it, he's worked in a huge corporation, and he's got this big salary, he's going to make it successful. Well, what happens in that particular case is that you've got so much of your financial cash flow moved towards salaries that you don't have enough to run the business. Both of those systems will fail. So you got to find a balance in between finding good management that understands what it's like to start projects up. Starting projects is hard work, and it's sacrifice. And sometimes you have to sacrifice salary. Sometimes you got to sacrifice immediate gratification and work extremely, extremely hard to get it through the difficult stages of startup. So those are some. The other is that you've got to have adequate cash flow to go through the difficulties of startup. And I would say that, I'd put that up really, really high as far as requirements to succeed. There's things that you cannot model in startups. Financially model, I call them just screw up things that happen that you can't predict. You got to have enough cash to get you through the problems. You might have a brownfield situation, and it maybe had some refrigeration that exists there. When you started it up, it worked, but all of a sudden it crapped out on you when you started it up, and you don't have enough cash to fix it right. So you kind of band-aid it, and then you get going, and then it breaks down again. So those kind of things, you've got to be adequately capitalized to overcome those kinds of problems. If you're not adequately capitalized, you're gonna fail. You just will fail. You'll limp along for a while, but then you start losing the confidence of your lenders, and they don't give you enough cash to operate. So it's really getting through that startup phase is of critical importance, and those that I've seen successful been able to accommodate it in the ways I just mentioned. I used to say, years ago, thou shalt not start a new plant at the same time you're starting a new marketing company. In other words, if you want to start a marketing company, start it first by getting some custom processing capacity somewhere and go out and sell your product, create some demand, and then once you've done that, then build the processing facility that could accommodate it. Well, today, you cannot find custom processing capacity, so you don't have a choice. Your choice is to start them both at the same time. And we've had some experience now of starting them both at the same time. It's not easy, but it can be done, and we have seen it done successfully. Those projects that don't succeed are the ones that get cash strapped to the startup, those that overpay on management, and those that, I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, but those that are always focused on supply first. If supply is what's driving the project, it will fail. It's got to be market driven, not supply driven. Now, an exception to that would be custom processing. Let's say you want to have more custom processing capacity in a community. Well, that's different. We all know that there's a lot of demand for that. You have to, of course, you have to go out and explore what that demand is. But nevertheless, you're really not marketing anything. You're not marketing a product, you're marketing a service. And if there's enough customers for that service, you should be in pretty good shape. Plus, you don't have to finance inventory and receivables. So that would be one exception to that. But again, I want to make sure that's clear, that if the only reason why you want a plant is a place to process your animals, that's the only reason, it will fail. Your plant's got to be a profit center. Even if it's 100% custom processing, it has to be a profit center. It has to make money to be sustainable. It's not a public service project, and it's not a supply project. It's got to be market driven. So I hope I didn't go too long in any of those comments, but those are just some of the thoughts that I've had based on some of the experience I've had over the years.
Well, you've had some good experiences, and that good and bad, the way it sounds. So I think that's valuable to people. The real surge here in the need for more processing at some level, and the marketing we're seeing from the producers to get to the public. We should think that there's opportunities here for the right people to pursue these facilities. So appreciate that, Keith. Let's go to a few questions that we've got. The first one is, how about setting up a smaller operation? And it says on individual allotted tribal land.
Well, I've been involved in some projects where that is the case, and there has been difficulty with that. From my experience, some of the difficulty has been working with tribal councils for approval process is not easy. You'll find one gentleman, a tribal gentleman that likes the project, supportive, and everything's go, 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 green, green, green light, green light, green light, and all of a sudden you get a red light because somebody in the tribal council, it gets political. And so I guess if you can stay away from politics on the tribal council, it makes a lot of sense. I think it makes a lot of sense, but just from my experience there, it isn't always easy.
Okay.
You might get some funding, but then again, you might get delays, and I'm kind of impatient that way. I don't like a lot of delays, and we've had experiences with delays on tribal projects.
Okay. David, here's a question for you. Question is there startup assistance information in the state of Wyoming? Maybe where would someone look for that?
I'm going to say, I would start off with your Department of Agriculture out there to start with. I did not look into Wyoming. I contemplated it, and I didn't go that far west, although I know they got some new processing being added in the state of Wyoming, which I think is just awesome. Some of the small harvest facilities out there currently that are only handled beef have helped some of the South Dakota pork producers here that have been hauling hogs out to them to be butchered. So, I mean, it's nice. I'd start with the Department of Ag. I would also check in with your Wyoming economic development center. I'm sure they have one. And, start at the local level. Start with your community. See if they do have a community economic development for new businesses. Great place
John,
to start.
David, I'm going to add one. There's a gentleman out there by the name of John Henn, Henn, works for the Wyoming Business Council. He's their ag specialist. Contact him. He will help you. He is very, very good and a cowboy. He's a cowboy, very, very good. Again, John Henn, Henn.
Thanks, Keith. That's great information. And here again, it's amazing how, if you're looking at doing something in the processing world, reach out to us. We have many different people on board with us on our team that we can reach out to and make connections. It seems like we all know somebody that knows somebody else that can help move projects forward. Glad to share that information.
Yeah, great comment, David. We're trying to be a resource here and promote this in the industry. So another question, if you already have a plant while going through the buying process, are there planners or consultants that can help get through the new inspection for USDA?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and let me tell you, it's not difficult. It's not difficult. You just got to have your ducks in a row, and you have to understand the HACCP systems. And there are people that can help you with that. Even your land grant universities. The University of Nebraska has a HACCP coordinator that can help you. So first of all, it's not scary. It's not difficult. And there's lots of help out there, including the University Extension Service.
Okay, great. Next question is, what are some considerations that should be taken when designing a processing facility to support multiple products? Beef, goats, pigs, chicken, wild game, fish. And then a follow-up, is it feasible to consider processing multiple types of product in one facility? I think that's the question. And then I think the follow-up here is, how common is it to see a commercial kitchen or equipment to support creating value-added products included in the facility?
Well, others can chime in here, but sorry about that. Others can chime in here, but yeah, there are a lot of multiple species facilities in the country, a lot of them, and you might, if you're interested in that, you might we can probably direct you to some you might tour, get a chance to look at, see how they handle things. But it's doable. It's doable to do multiple species. Of course, everything has to be under time constraints and scheduled appropriately. But yeah, it's very common. In fact, they're not large facilities as you would expect, but nevertheless, they're very functional, and I've seen some of them very, very successful. What were some of the other questions about that?
Well, how common is it to see a commercial kitchen or equipment that adds value to the products?
Well, usually in plants, small plants that do a lot of further processing. The further processing, they usually has a cooking or smoking operation associated with it, and does a lot of curing activities, bacon, hams, etc. And they're artisans. I mean, very, very artisans. And if you consider that a commercial kitchen, I would say that's pretty commonplace as well. I've even seen some now with it. They've got soup manufacturing in their plants, and that's starting to take off. So you're starting to see some further processing into soup stock, soup products that are sold at retail. So they're out there, and I don't look at their books every day, but what I see them growing and a growing customer base, I would say they're successful.
Good. Hey, Keith, here's a question probably directed at that business plan. So a little financial question. Is there a target percent labor cost to gross revenue in a facility that's a slaughter to finish cuts facility?
Well, there are, and it is so dependent. It's so dependent on what you're manufacturing. So there's no thumb rule. I guess first of all, I'll say there's no thumb rule. There's no thumb rule. If we are going to design a 300 or 500 head per day beef plant that sells fresh and frozen subprimals, that's different than one that actually is smaller than that sells beef jerky and ground beef patties. So there's so many different scenarios you have to run through, and that's one of the reasons you do a feasibility study, to find out what those numbers are.
Okay. Is there any difference, would there be any difference in labor costs for a USDA inspected facility versus one that's not?
There oftentimes are, but there shouldn't be. You're still working with food, right? And all of that does require some skill sets that, and you know how this works. I mean, the more skilled your activity is within a plant, the more it's worth. And what oftentimes happens is in some of these small rural communities that say custom exempt plants that are not USDA inspected, the workforce gets paid less. Maybe the standard of living is less in that community, but nevertheless, they still do artisan type work, and they work hard, and they have, they got a skill that you can't just reinvent. So they should, I guess, I don't want to be a smart aleck, but they should all be paid according to the skills they bring to the table.
Sure. Okay. So here's an interesting question from Brad. He's looking at starting a small facility to market his livestock, but it sounds like that may not be such a good idea. But adding premium to the livestock and gain from the processing for his livestock, and then fill in with custom processing, how does that fit?
Well, that's common. That's not unusual. It's commonplace. And you always start with your own first, right? I mean, you don't want to start offering custom services to others until your workmanship is to a point where you trust that the work you're doing can meet a customer's needs. So you always start with your own. That's where and if I didn't bring that up before, I'll bring it up now. So even if you are with that model in mind, you're going to do your own, you're going to sell your own products, and then you want to offer custom processing services, you always start maybe with some low-cost cows first to get them through and to train your people, and you're taking the risk on those. Then as your workmanship improves, now you can start marketing your own products, put a brand on it, et cetera, et cetera. Thirdly, now your workmanship is improved where you can now start offering services to other people. So no, that's a great model, but there's a sequence of how you start that.
Okay, good, thanks. Next question: are there design templates out there that someone might review if they're trying to decide setting up for a smaller plant?
There are some, and there, I don't know of anything recent, but I have looked through some that came through University Extension. Cornell, I think, has come up with some. Others on the call may know of some that exist. There's not a lot, but there are some. And then that's kind of a segue to a previous comment made by Central Confinement Service, is that I think that's something that they're certainly looking at developing themselves, so that they can create kind of these templates that can be used in multiple locations.
Yeah, that is correct. And we're very happy to talk with anybody who has an interest in that and work through some of those decision points. I think that's the amount of questions we've got out there. I might ask each one of you for just a closing comment, if you will. Oh, wait a minute, we got another question. So the model of processing your own livestock first and supplementing with custom processing as space allows after everyone is properly trained is not bad, dangerous, or destined to failure, but market demand still must come first. Question mark.
Right, spot on. That's spot on. But keep in mind, when you custom process, the market demand is those you're providing a service to, and you have to be customer focused and customer driven, which means if you just want to fill in with custom processing, you still got to be very, very service minded, because those people pay your bills. You got to do a good job. You've got to do a job that's worthy of they coming back. You want them to come back, and you want them to tell others about your service too. So not only do you have to be really customer focused with your own branded products that you're going to sell in your local community, you've got to be customer focused on the workmanship that you provide other people. And that's, I'm glad they made the point, because that's spot on.
Yeah, Keith, and that is good advice for any business. We live that here every day, because it's those customers that you take care of, and those customers that come back that keep you in business. So great point. How about a closing comment from each one of you? Dave, you got a couple comments to wrap us up?
This is exciting. I think there's a huge opportunity here to meet the upcoming challenges and demands that the consumer wants. As far as looking for opportunities on the financing side of it, don't forget to check out your rural electric co-ops, your REAs. They're in the business of selling power. A small processing plant demands a lot of power. A lot of these rural electric co-ops do have funds available to help, to help these projects along. Don't hesitate to check out and find out what your local community development has to offer as well. Look for value-added programs, and especially check out the USDA Rural Development. They have a great resource there with, ag business or further ag processing businesses. So just some ideas to check out here in the near future.
Good, thank you, David. Keith, a couple of closing thoughts.
Well, I want to thank you and the participants in this webinar for inviting me. It's always fun to kind of explain where the road you've been on the last 20 years. And hopefully things that I've learned can be of help to others. I appreciate this. This industry has been extremely good to me, and I always like to give back if possible. So appreciate the invitation, appreciate getting to know some of you, and hopefully I'll get an opportunity to meet all of you at some point.
Keith, we really appreciate your time and your experiences and putting that out on the table. It's been fun here at CCS. While we're a construction company and we're in the building business, we're having a lot of fun with these webinars and throwing out information or having discussions about topics that people are certainly interested in. So I would like to wrap up the meeting at this point. The meeting is recorded and will be available, I believe, on our YouTube channel. And if anybody has any questions or wants to discuss the topics or further the discussion, please feel free to give us a call, shoot us an email, contact us any way that you would like, and we'll continue down this road. So thank you very much for everybody who attended, and Keith and Dave, and we'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.